defined solely by us humans, sex is a very good part of human life.
We live our lives in a great deal of hypocrisy, telling our children to do one thing while we do something else.
The quest for control. We all would love it if our lives were a bit more controllable.
Discussions within the Christian community about these questions will be primary for the survival of the Christian community.
You might say, I thought this was about reproductive technology. So how does a topic about youth risk-taking relate to reproductive technologies? Well, actually, our reproductive technologies result in the progeny that are taking the risks in society today. So that's the tie-in. And I think I'm kind of the springboard that will lead to some of the other topics today, culminating in the sessions tomorrow on dealing with these very important issues. In dealing with risk-taking, I would like to cover today for you several specific things. One is the prevalence of risk-taking among young people in society today. Second is that education, knowledge per se, is not the answer to the problem. Third, we must deal with risk-taking behavior first before we begin to address the specific abuses that kids are undergoing today. So we have to deal with this whole aspect of being risk-takers first. Fourth, the stability and influence of the family is key. It is key. Parental presence in the home, parental expectations, and parental disapproval of early sexual debut is very critical to this matter. We must avoid hypocrisy among adults. As I speak today, you will hear me say that over and over. We live our lives in a great deal of hypocrisy, telling our children to do one thing while we do something else. Our youth must have appropriate role models and examples of Christian living in order for us to be able to deal with these issues. And we must deal with risky behavior under a comprehensive prevention program. So if we could have the lights down and start the slides, then I would like to run through some of these topics with you and talk to you about the risky behaviors that our young people undergo. The Heritage Foundation published a study in 1995 which indicates that from 1960 to the present time, thank you very much, we have seen the following changes. We have seen an increase in violent crime by 560%, marked increase in the out-of-marriage birth rate in the United States. We've seen a significant increase in divorce rates in this country, as you're well aware. Threefold increase in the number of children living in single-parent homes. A 200% increase in suicide among teens and children in this country, and an 80-point decrease in the average SAT score. So that's what we face in the United States today. I would like to give you this morning some information from a national study that is published from the Centers for Disease Control. It's really a very excellent study. Having worked at the CDC, I can tell you that some of the work there is very biased and some of the work is very factual and honest. This is an excellent portrayal, I believe, of what goes on in the United States. It's a two-stage cluster sample which is felt to be representative. It's taken from several states, 35 states that are willing to participate, and 16 local school-based units. and it looks at the risky behaviors that our young people engage in the United States on an annual basis. It's published, this is the 1997 issue, and it was published in the September 27th, 1996 MMWR. Just go through some of these numbers with me. I think they will amaze you. The number of young people who rarely or never use seat belts, 21.7%. Rode with a driver who had been drinking, this is within the last 30 days, 38.8%. Had driven themselves after drinking, consuming alcohol, 15%. Carried a weapon. 20% of young people in the United States said, I've carried a weapon within the last 30 days. Carried a gun within the last 30 days, 7.5%. And been in a physical fight, 39% of young people had been in a fight within the last 30 days. 5% of our young people feel too unsafe to even go to school on a daily basis. 10% had carried a weapon on school property, a concealed weapon while going to school. 8.5% had been threatened or injured with a weapon at school. 35% had property stolen or damaged at school, one of the reasons they're afraid to go and attend. 24% of the young people surveyed had considered suicide within the last 12 months, and 8.7% had attempted suicide. These are our young people, the youth of the United States of America that we're talking about, and the risky behaviors that they engage in. Looking at total numbers on the left with the female-male incidents on the right, but 71% ever smoked cigarettes. You might think, well, is that a very significant figure? Remember, the progression of addictive processes begins with nicotine. If you look at Dick Clayton's work from the University of Kentucky, he's shown what's called a progression of addiction, and it almost always begins with the nicotine and then progresses to other stronger addictions. Smokeless tobacco, used alcohol ever, 80%. Alcohol within 30 days, 52% of all young people have consumed alcohol. Episodic heavy drinking, binge drinking, getting drunk, a third of all young people have engaged in that, and 7% have used cocaine. So very risky behaviors. Look at this, the numbers before 13 years of age in this country. 25% smoking cigarettes, a third, once again, consuming alcohol, 7.5% marijuana, and 1% less than 13 are already using cocaine. If we look at sexual activity among these young people, and I remember that these numbers vary depending on the study that you look at, but this is quite a balanced study across the populace of the United States. 48.9% of Caucasian, 73.4% of African American, and 57.6% of Hispanics have been sexually active at some point in time. These rates increase from the 9th grade to the 12th grade. But the significant thing to me is that 37% of 9th graders are sexually active, have been sexually active. If we look at the numbers that are currently sexually active, they drop off a little bit, but still 23.5% of 9th graders are currently sexually active. And these are confidential surveys that are taken away from parents so that kids don't fear that their parents are going to find out. And it's felt to be a reliable survey. 4 or more sexual partners during their lifetime. These are short lifetimes, and yet these kids already admit to having 4 or more sexual partners. Those rates are greater in the African American population, 14.2% among Caucasians, 35.6% among blacks, and 17.6% among Hispanics. But look at the number of 9th graders who've already had 4 or more sexual partners, 13%. By the time we get to high school, 23% admit that they've had 4 or more sexual partners. Why is that important? Number one, multiple sexual partners is the single greatest risk factor for all sexually transmitted infections. And number two, it leads to extreme rates of emotional dysfunction. when kids have more than one sexual partner. I'll talk about that later. Well, is this just one survey with these extreme numbers? Let's look at some other surveys that have been done. Benson and Torpy in 1995 in the journal Obstetrics and Gynecology looked at Chicago 8th graders. Fairly large study, 976 kids in the 8th grade. History of having intercourse, 42% of Caucasians, 40% of Hispanics, 82% of blacks admitted, males admitted they'd been sexually active. Smaller numbers among the females, 13% Caucasian, 10% Hispanic, and 32% black. But look at the numbers that said they'd have more than 3 partners in a year, 8th graders. 40 to 64% among males and 11 to 22% among females by the time they were in the 8th grade. Extremely sexually active young people. Another study, Steve Small and Tom Luster from the Journal of Marriage and Family. Over 2,100 adolescents in the 7th, 9th, and 11th grades. A study that was not racially balanced, only 8% African American, the majority being Caucasian and Hispanics. But what they did, they looked at risk factors, and they graded 20 risk factors in this study. It was interesting to me that they found that there is a statistically significant correlation of risk factors among males and females. Most of the other studies that have been done have found differences in those rates. But the 4 most frequent risk factors were, number 1, alcohol use. So you can see why addictive behavior with substance abuse is so important. Number 2 was having a steady girlfriend or boyfriend. I'm going to come back to that later when I talk about some work that Dr. Donald Joy had done. But the second leading risk factor was getting into steady dating relationships early. Third was low parental monitoring. We'll talk about that later. And fourth, parents accepting adolescent sexual activity and not taking a stand. Those were the 4 leading risk factors among both girls and boys. When you look at those in that same study at the number of factors, the greater the number of factors present, total of those 20, the greater the chance that that child is going to be sexually active. When you don't have any risk factor, 15% of males and 1% of the females said that they were sexually active. But by the time you get to significant numbers of factors, greater than 8 for the females, greater than 5 for the males, 80 to 90% of them are sexually active. It's a cumulative process. Please take that home today. We're not dealing with one issue. We're dealing with a multiplicity of issues, and we must address them in that fashion. What are some of the factors that contribute to this? Well, I contend that one of the biggest factors is the media. The average teen watches 23 hours of television a week, and as Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he." You put garbage in the brain, garbage is going to come out. If you example for kids in the media sexually explicit types of behavior, they're going to act that behavior out. The average teen watches 70 to 90 commercials a day. What is the leading theme among commercials in the United States today? Sexuality. Everything goes back to sensuality when you're advertising product. The average teen sees 9,000 scenes of sexual intercourse per year on television, with 80% of those outside of marriage. When was the last time you saw some sexually explicit activity on television or in a movie where the young woman who is engaged in that activity ended up infertile for the rest of her life because she had chlamydial salpingitis? When was the last time that you saw a young woman who died as a result of engaging in sexual activity, or the young man acquires HIV? We don't see that very often, do we? So what we portray is the good aspect, and we don't portray the bad. In USA Today, it's one of your local Christian publications, in 1995, they published this survey, which was done across the country. 83% of adults surveyed said the entertainment industry should decrease sex and violence. Now, they say that, they're not doing much about it. 68% said the moral climate would improve if Hollywood did that. 65% said the entertainment industry is out of touch with the moral values of the American people. And 58% placed the blame on parents for allowing children to watch and participate in this type of activity. So even the secular realm, the populace of this country, feel that the entertainment industry is out of touch with what they really want to teach their children. We need to help them to state that in a more strong fashion. I want to show you 4 magazine articles. And if you could dim the lights a little bit, maybe you could see it better. But these are articles I cut out of teen magazines recently. Kissing 101, the best kinds of kisses. Shy kisses, subtle kisses. How do you kiss? Would you rather have love or sex? Nude vibrations. This is right out of a teen magazine. Open the page. This is what you see. And should parents let their kids have sex at home? 2 arguments. Do you open the doors for your kids, latchkey kids, parents not at home, or do you pay a more strict attention to whether your kids are involved sexually even in your own home? This is what our kids are faced with day in and day out. They see this in the media, they read it, they watch it on television, they see it in the movies. So we've allowed the detestable to live with the good so long in this country that it's infiltrated our minds, and we don't know the difference. We don't know what is bad or what is good. We even question in our own hearts, is this right, is this wrong, should I let my child engage in this behavior? We have to go back to determining what's right and wrong, what's biblical and moral and what is not. And we have to take a stand on that. We have to be courageous as adults in order to do that. The victim of this whole thing, the title of this talk, are our children. And why? The family and our family units are torn down, 50% divorce rates. Many of our children living in single-parent homes are living with adoptive parents. We're told that the government, not God, can supply the answers, can take care of the problem for you. You can be protected with a condom. You can do this and do that to avoid consequences of behavior. We don't address consequences. We want immediate gratification. We've seen the loss of spiritual principles in school and government. And that goes from the top all the way to the bottom. And as was said last night, I am in complete agreement. Unfortunately, the church has failed to address these issues. The church has put its head in the sand and said, let somebody else take care of it. It's not something that we want to deal with. And we, as religious leaders, as spiritual directors, we need to make sure that the church steps back into this picture. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of consequences. I really don't have time to go into this today, and others will be addressing these later. But be aware that of the 10 leading infectious diseases in the United States today, 7 are sexually transmitted diseases. Major impact on disease and on dollars spent in the United States today. 70%, 7 of the 10 leading infectious diseases are sexually transmitted diseases. Our young people are the principal, comprise the principal number of individuals in that large incidence and prevalence. If you look at the number of STDs in the United States on an annual basis, there are 12 million new cases annually, according to the Centers for Disease Control. When I calculate the numbers, and in my book, Women at Risk, we use the number 15 million because I think if you calculate it accurately, they're more like 15 million annually. But 10 million occur among young people 15 to 29 years of age, of all those STDs. What about teenagers and STDs? Well, they make up less than 10% of the U.S. population, but they account for 1/4 of all the sexually transmitted infections. 1 in every 4 people who are newly infected with HIV are less than 22 years of age. 25% of all young people 25 years of age or less have a viral sexually transmitted infection. 20%. Of sexually active teens get a new STD every year, 3 million teens on an annual basis. So it's a very major problem in the United States. According to the Centers for Disease Control, adolescents 10 to 19 years of age and young adults 20 to 24 years of age are at a higher risk for acquiring STDs for a number of reasons, and these are those reasons. Number one, they're more likely to have multiple partners. I've already shown you that. Kids have multiple partners. They don't just have one partner. Do you know what it means when you ask a young person, do you have one sexual partner? They all answer yes, because right now they're currently sexually monogamous with one partner. And that's what it means to a young person to be monogamous. Number two, they may be more likely to engage in unprotected intercourse. I don't care what you read about safe sex. I don't care what you hear about the condom emphasis program. Young people very frequently engage in unprotected intercourse. The CDC is very proud of its latest figure that 51% of males admitted that they used condoms in their latest survey. What that survey said was, have you used a condom? 51% said yes. Okay? That doesn't mean they use a condom with every act of intercourse or that they take the 7 steps to use it correctly. Third, they may select partners at high risk. Most young people who engage in risky behaviors will select partners who engage in risky behavior. In addition, for some organisms, there is a physiologic susceptibility. Dr. Joe McElhaney will probably talk to you about this, but the physiologic change in women, young girls, where the squamocolumnar junction, the junction between the 2 types of cells that line the vagina, cervix, and uterus, is further on the outside and more susceptible to infection by bacteria such as chlamydia. So there's a physiologic reason why they contract disease. Human papillomavirus. I just selected one organism just for emphasis, but you're aware that human papillomavirus is the most prevalent sexually transmitted virus in the United States today. A recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine, I'd advise you to read this study even if you're not in medicine, but it's published in 1998, volume 338. And basically it was a prolonged survey, a 3-year survey of co-eds looking at HPV. The cumulative 36-month incidence of HPV infection was 43%, okay, at the end of that time. But over the survey, 60% of women were infected with HPV at one time or another. That's higher than Joe and I talk about 45% all the time. This is 60% had HPV at some time during that study. Maybe they didn't have it at the end because they got rid of the lesions. But 60% were HPV positive at some time in this 36-month study. That's co-eds. These are intelligent young women in the United States today, victimized by infection from males who didn't know that they were infected and are having sexual intercourse with them. Human herpes virus 8. You probably don't know much about HHV. It's not an organism that causes genital herpes. That's herpes 1 and herpes 2. But a recent study from the New England Journal of Medicine looking at HHV-8. Prevalence of antibodies, 37.6% of homosexual males and none of heterosexual males had this virus present. And this virus is now associated with the development of Kaposi sarcoma in HIV-positive males. So it goes on and on and on. It's not just HIV. Now we have the association of a virus, herpes virus, that enhances the chance of an HIV-positive male of developing Kaposi sarcoma and dying of disease. The problems and challenges for sexually transmitted diseases, well, we'd like to think that we're going to eventually be able to immunize everyone. The 4th annual World's AIDS Conference was just concluded in Geneva. And do you know what the consensus of that conference was? We're no further along in developing a vaccine. As a matter of fact, one of the papers presented there on monkeys, simian virus, HIV, showed that when they immunized the monkeys, they actually developed the disease. So we're no further along in developing a vaccine to immunize people against HIV, nor are we closer with HPV or herpes. And it has to do with multiple strains. You can't develop a vaccine that has 2 or 5 strains in it, and then you don't cover for all of these other strains of the virus. There's developing resistance to a number of different organisms that are non-viral. Trichomonas vaginalis, a common cause of sexually transmitted vaginitis in women. There are rising rates of resistance to the only antibiotic that we have to treat it. Yeast infections. You think, well, so what? Yeast infections. But now yeast, the common causes of candidal vaginitis, are generally resistant to all of the over-the-counter medications, because when a woman gets discharged, she goes and buys Monistat or Gyne-Lotrimin or one of the products and uses it. The organisms are exposed, and now they're resistant to that. So over-the-counter products are gone, and we really only have a couple of prescription medications that will eradicate this. Chlamydia trachomatis. There are reports now in this country, actually, as well as from Europe, of developing resistance to tetracycline, the main treatment for chlamydia infections. These organisms are smart. They're going to outsmart us, and we can't keep up with them. What we have to do is prevent disease. We can't always count on coming up with an antibiotic or an antiviral to treat. What about teen pregnancy? Well, about 1 million teen pregnancies in the United States each year. 95% of those are quoted to be unintended. They're unplanned. 42% of all teenagers choose to abort their pregnancies. That number's been fairly steady for the last 4 to 5 years. 83% of teen moms end up on welfare. So the vast majority end up on government subsidization. 50% are pregnant within the first 6 months of their first act of intercourse. And as I'll show you in just a moment, the average male-female age difference is quite significant. 1/3 of the fathers of these teen mothers are unemployed or are not in school, and certainly can't provide for these children. We also know that there are high rates of divorce among this population. What are some of the factors that lead to a young woman becoming pregnant? These are those that have been elicited in a recent study. Dependency needs, insecure feminine identity. We address that in our book, As Jesus Cared for Women. Lack of self-esteem, impulsivity, attempt to replace an absent father. Many of these young women are in homes where they don't have a father. They don't know what a male in the home is like. They don't feel that love. The response to stress, mixed messages, as we talked about before, and having another teen pregnant in the home. Do you know that if a teenager gets pregnant in the home and she has a sister within 5 years of her, there's a 75% chance she'll get pregnant? Because she wants to emulate that behavior. She sees all the attention that goes into that. If you take an analysis of adult paternity, I don't want to go into major detail on this, but if you'll look at the 3rd bullet down, the average age difference between the father of a teen pregnant woman and the teen is 6.4 years. That same figure is true in Kentucky at 6.3 years. So it seems to be across the country. There's this huge difference between the age of a male getting a teenager pregnant and parents not having enough discipline in the home to say, you don't need to be dating that guy. He is more mature. He's wanting sexual activity. You're not at that level yet. So we have a 14-year-old impregnated by a 21-year-old. A 15-year-old impregnated by a 23-year-old, and it goes on and on and on. And what happens to that male when she gets pregnant? He's out the door. He's gone. He doesn't have a job. He's not in school. And 83% of those young women end up on welfare. As far as the consequences for the children of these teenage mothers, they're far more likely to be physically abused, abandoned, or neglected in their lives. They perform much worse in school, 50% more likely to repeat a grade, perform significantly worse on tests of their cognitive function, and are far more likely to drop out of school. The daughters of adolescent moms are 83% more likely to become pregnant themselves. 83% more likely if their mother conceived when they were a teen. And the sons of adolescent mothers are 2.5 times more likely to be in prison. This is the outfall of teenage pregnancy. The cost of childbearing in the United States today among teenagers is $29 billion. $29 billion, a major cost to society. So Jim Donovan has said that sexual intercourse is an element of a syndrome of problem behaviors that includes drug, alcohol, nicotine use, minor delinquency, and school difficulty. There's some others I would add to that, but I think he summed it up very well in the American Journal of Public Health in 1983. This is a conundrum of problems. We are not talking about a single issue here. I think we can corroborate that by looking at this study from Pediatrics in February of 1991. And here in the blue we have virgins, and in the green we have non-virgins. We're looking at males 12 to 16, and then I'll show you females. But in every single risk factor, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, other drug use, riding with a drug-using driver, considered dropping out of school, running away from home, arrested by police, suspended from school, in every behavior, the rates were significantly higher among non-virgins as opposed to virgins. What that means is these things all tie in together. When you have a young person who is engaged in risky behavior, they are much more likely to also be sexually active. They don't just use drugs and not be sexually active. They don't just smoke cigarettes or smoke marijuana and refrain from sexual activity. These things are all interrelated. The same thing's true among young women, 12 to 16. In every category, significant differences. So what do we do about this? What are we saying in this country? Well, we try to discourage risky behavior, don't we? We talk about not smoking. And so we're trying to eliminate cigarettes, and we raise the tax, and we make them, try to make them less available to kids. We do have some drug emphasis programs, even though I don't agree with the way they're carried out. I don't agree with giving kids needles and so forth. We talk about carrying weapons. We now have some legislation to try to decrease weapons on school campuses. We talk about violence. Plus or minus on alcohol and pornography, really haven't taken great chances or great stances there, and with gambling. But we don't take the same kind of stand on sexual activity. Now, why do you think that as we get down here to the bottom, alcohol, pornography, gambling, there's less of an emphasis on these things? We talk more about some of the other things like nicotine and drugs. You know why I think? When adults engage in a behavior, they are unwilling to talk to kids in a real strong way about not engaging those behaviors. Although we act out of hypocrisy to a great extent, there's something within us that says, well, I can't really say something real strong about that to my child because I know I engage in that activity. I'm having an affair. I'm into pornography myself, so how can I tell my son not to engage in that activity? We have to have role models and adults who are living consistent lives and willing to take a stand on these issues. Young people are risk takers. They are risk takers. When I was 16 years old, I drove down a highway blindfolded on a dare. When I was 17 years old, I climbed a cliff, a solid sheer cliff, with a 200-foot drop down below at night in the dark with two other guys. Never thought anything could happen to me. I'm invincible. That is the way young people think. That's the way you probably thought, and now, you know, you've forgotten about that. But young people take risks. So we have to help them to understand the risks they're taking and the consequences thereof. One of the things that young people are struggling with right now is they can't even trust themselves. This is a series of studies from the University of North Carolina and two from California, one from Alameda County and one from San Francisco. 59 to 92% of the males surveyed, and these were college-age males, said that they would lie to a potential sexual partner about having an STD in order to achieve sexual favors. So young people can't even trust themselves. We have males walking around infected with HPV who don't tell their partner, and that's the reason that 60% of the co-eds are infected with HPV and suffer the subsequent consequences thereof. If young people are risk takers, why would they buy into this whole concept of safe sex and figure that a condom's going to help them? They feel they're invincible anyway. They're not going to contract a sexually transmitted disease, even though they have 4 or more partners in a year. The biggest constraints to this type of activity according to Don Joy in Parents, Kids, and Sexual Integrity, are parental models and religious teaching. We don't hear a lot about that, but you're going to hear more and more about this aspect of parental modeling because it is becoming more prevalent in the literature. In a journal, in the JAMA in 1997, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the conclusion of that Ad Health study was that parental influence is the greatest deterrent to delinquent behavior. We are finally waking up and finding out that parents are important in the lives of their kids, and we need to return the rearing of our children back to parents. Schools aren't going to do it. Our churches haven't done it. Parents need to resume that role. Now, we don't always have two parents in the home, but we've got to work on this issue of parental modeling and parental discipline. Now, I'm sorry these are dark, and I'll talk to you about them real quickly as we're closing here, but I want to go through a little bit of work that was done by Desmond Morris, and it's quite old. It was done in 1971 in his book, Intimate Behavior. But I think it elicits for us what we're facing here. Desmond Morris developed what are called the steps of bonding. Okay? And what he did, he started out working with animals in human development, and then he carried this over into humans. And what he found was that there are 12 steps to bonding among humans, and I'll go through those briefly with you. What he found in his conclusions was if you miss a step in that process of bonding, then the bonding is weak and it's very likely to break. He also found that once sexual arousal begins, which is step number 7 in bonding, then the previous steps are often neglected if you hurry into them. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. I want to explain that to you. But just bear in mind that this is the original work of Desmond Morris. And what Desmond Morris found was that the first step is eye to body. And I'll just briefly explain these to you. I'm 17 years old, and I'm at a party. And across the room, I notice this gorgeous brunette. And all of a sudden, my interest is piqued. And so I have eye-to-body contact. That's the first step in any bonding process. You notice somebody, okay? Then there's eye-to-eye. She notices me. And all of a sudden, I'm smiling because I can tell that I'm noticed. So you get feedback. So we're eye-to-eye. And then probably 4 or 5 years later, I finally got up enough nerve, and I said something to her. So voice-to-voice contact, you begin to speak. You can see the progression in the steps. Hand-to-hand. My wife often kids me about how much courage it took me to reach over and take her hand when we were dating. We were on our 3rd date, and finally I got up enough courage to hold her hand. You know, I mean, today, by the 3rd date, kids are in a motel someplace. But hand-to-hand contact. And then arm to shoulder. A little bit more, a further step along the way. You feel comfortable putting your arm around a shoulder. A little bit more intimate is arm to waist. So a little bit further down in the body, a little bit more intimate step. All of these are considered to be non-sexually intimate steps of bonding, the first 6. Now we get to the sexually intimate steps. We're still fairly safe, but we're treading on thin ice here. Face-to-face, hand-to-head, peaceful body. You're comfortable lying down together. Still no intimate contact, but you can see the progression here in the steps of bonding. Because when kids get into this aspect of activity, and you just think about what you see. I mean, how many times do you see kids just holding hands? They're already lying down. I showed you those pictures before. Peaceful body. Then you're in the midst of intimate sexual activity. Mouth to breast, hand to genitalia, genitalia to genitalia. Okay, so once that's crossed, the progression is fairly rapid. Now, what Desmond Morris says, that step 6 is the last exit. This is what he says, the last exit on the runway towards sexual bonding. That's the time to stop or get off unless you're going to progress. Ending a relationship after step 6 leaves damage. Once kids get past step 6, any of us, in that bonding relationship, and the relationship breaks off, there's emotional damage involved there. And so when kids are sexually active and then they break off that relationship, there is tremendous emotional baggage to carry there. Each step leaves a desire for more sensation. That's the way God intended it. He wanted each step of bonding to be in an appropriate succession and to lead us to the point where in marriage we would desire to be sexually intimate and procreate. That's God's plan for us. Now, in our book, Women at Risk, that Don Joy and I wrote, Don Joy talks about his perception of this. He wrote a book called Bonding, Relationships in the Image of God, and he quotes from that. Each new step in the intimacy sequence brings rewarding sensations. That's the reason we like it. We feel good. It makes us have sensate feeling. These new sensations are triggered by the focus on the relationship. The sensations are heightened by brain chemicals and neurotransmitters which seal the step in memory. Remember that. If you think back to sexual activity in your own life, you don't forget it. It is imprinted in your brain, and Don Joy has done some research to find that that imprinting process occurs. That's the reason it's so hard to forget sexual infidelity. That's the reason that we feel guilty when we're engaged in sexual activity that we shouldn't be in. God wanted it that way. It's intended to remind us of our failure. Each step needs to be sealed before rushing to the next step in a new sensation high. You have to take this step by step. Now, what happens to young people when they don't do this? And what Don Joy has shown is that if a young person goes through these steps of bonding, hopefully appropriately, and gets to sexual intimacy, let's say at 16 years of age, okay, and that relationship ends, there's emotional damage and emotional baggage that that young person has. But what happens in the next relationship that young person is involved in? Do they go through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? No. They go to the step where they left off, and they start that relationship there. And that's one reason why we see so much forcing of guys among girls who haven't even been involved in this bonding process in their relationships. So once involved in sexual activity, there's a significant chance that that young person will be involved in sexual activity again in every other relationship they have. That's why we have to talk about fidelity and waiting until marriage. Knowledge-based sex education per se is not the answer to this, but I do want to show you evidence of an expanded study program, the one that was done at Emory University in Atlanta, that included all of these things, and I think indicates to us that when you do this appropriately, and I guarantee you this wasn't done from a Christian perspective, but when you do things right, then it does have an influence. This program was based on an immunization model. They talked about all aspects of addictive behavior, including STDs, pregnancy. They talked about abstinence. One of the key things was they taught refusal skills among the young girls there. They taught them how to say no, and they used teen role models. They taught them that self-esteem is not learned, it's earned. Just like well, my mind's gone blank, but some of the other studies, other programs that have been done in this country where self-esteem is one of the key aspects of teaching. They taught them how to say no. They gave them specific answers. So if a guy says to you, everybody's doing it, then you say, I'm not everybody. They had answers for the questions. They prepared the young people for that. And so what happened in that program? Well, they took 8th graders. And at the end of the 8th grade, if you look on the left, those that were involved in the program, 8% of boys had initiated coitus versus 29% that weren't in the program, and only 1% of the girls versus 15% that weren't in the program. Statistically significant differences. By the start of the 9th grade, the numbers were varying a little bit because the program was only in the 8th grade. And by the end of the 9th grade, those numbers are evening out. You have to continue the program. It has to be balanced. It has to be across the board. It has to impact all of these issues of addictive behavior, but you have to continue it. The conclusions were that students not sexually active before the program had lower rates of intercourse than non-program students. Students sexually active before the program were not significantly influenced by the program. We have to get to them early enough in the program so that they won't become sexually active. It did result in lower teen pregnancy rates, and one of the other things they found was teaching family planning along with medical refusal skills was not compatible. If you're going to talk about family planning, you do it here. If you're going to talk about sexual activity and abstinence, you do it here. You don't do it in the same program. We have to tell kids that education is not all that they need. They have to pass the practical exam. We have to tell them that they need to make their decisions before it's too late, before they're in the back seat of a car, before they're at home alone with their parents not there. They have to make the decisions before the passion of the event. We have to convince young people that communication is the highest state of intimacy, that there is no greater state of intimacy than communication between two people, whether you're married or not married. And we have to convince them that sexual intercourse is not the highest state of connectedness. It's an aspect, an offshoot of emotional connectedness. We have to get abstinence back on track here. For too long, we've emphasized all of these other things, and we've forgotten about abstinence. Abstinence needs to achieve its place in risky behaviors. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to help kids and parents understand their risks. We need to set good examples as adults. We need to teach abstinence from a character-based perspective. We need to teach kids the ways of saying no. We must emphasize a comprehensive approach to these risky behaviors. We must enable achievement of educational and vocational goals among our young people so they don't drop out of school. We must enhance self-esteem, especially among those kids living in single-parent homes. And we must get our churches involved. Because I think what we will find is that if we get our parents involved again, then we can begin to deter some of this behavior. What do we need to pray for as leaders? We need to pray that the youth of this land will recognize that their bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own? You've been bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your bodies. Number two, we need to pray that we will, as adults, repent and return to God. Jeremiah 3:15 says, I will give you shepherds after my own heart who will feed you on knowledge and understanding if you repent. If we repent as adults, God is going to stir up leaders like Joe McElhaney and others in this country. He's going to give us the shepherds we need, Jeremiah 3:15. That will restore the parental influence among our families in the United States. That's one of our biggest jobs, folks. We've got to restore the parental influence in our homes. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. And when we do these things, we're going to have relationships among our young people that will be lasting, that won't jump into sexual activity immediately, that will go through the appropriate steps of bonding. And we will restore this land because he will restore it for us. Thank you.